Over the last 20 years of working in kitchens all around the world, one thing that I've learned is that cooking isn't about fancy ingredients. While yes, fancy ingredients are amazing and amazing to work with, what's more important is learning how to develop and build flavor. Today, I'm gonna break down some of the techniques that restaurants use not only to build flavor, but also to balance flavor so you can do the same at home. So I'm gonna break down the base flavors, middle flavors, and finishing flavors, because once you have an understanding of them all and how they work together, it's gonna level up your food and flavor when you're cooking for your friends and family. And to demonstrate this, I'm gonna run you through 2 recipes that I cook frequently at home, and I'm gonna teach you different ways we can level up or level down and balance flavor as we go along. Should be a fun one, let's get stuck in. So starting at the start, or at the beginning, I wanna talk about base flavors. There's a load of different ways that we can amp up base flavors, and one of the most simple ways that I can talk about this or demonstrate this is when you're cooking rice, if you use something like chicken stock, you're gonna increase the level of flavor. Now, if you're using chicken stock and rice, the rice isn't gonna taste like chicken, but the flavor compounds in there is gonna amplify that flavor, and it's gonna give a much more flavorful and aromatic flavor. Now, if you don't eat meat, the same theory applies to a vegetable stock. If you want a stock recipe, links above for my stocks and sauces video. And if you don't want to go through the hassle of making your own stocks and freezing it, by the way, it's really not that hard and it's a good thing to do once a month. I do understand if you're busy and you don't have time to do it, then find a good quality stock at your local butcher or supermarket. This method also applies to if you're making grains. So if you're cooking pearl barley, if you're cooking lentils for a salad, anything like that, anything that the product absorbs moisture, if you want to level up your base flavor, use stock instead of water. The other thing is if you're eating a curry, for example, you don't always need to amp up the base flavor of your rice. What I mean by that is if you're making a really delicious curry and you've done all the work in building the base flavors for that curry, the rice is a vehicle for those base flavors of that curry. So where using chicken stock and grains works especially well is if you're doing grain salads and things like that, where you don't have another really saucy, super flavorful dish going along next to it. If I'm cooking a curry at home, I eat it with plain rice. If I'm making a rice salad or a grain salad, I cook my rice with stock. Another great technique that restaurants often use is creating shellfish oils. The shellfish oils really help building base flavors. And especially when you've got products like these beautiful prawns we've got here, we're gonna peel these so that we have the meat for our seafood pasta. But there's so much flavor in these heads that it seems like a waste just to throw them out. So peel your prawns and save all the shells. Don't put the poop shit in here though. That stuff's not nice. I did catch a chef doing that once. Place them into a pot and then cover them in an oil. Now I'm using olive oil here, but you could use any neutral flavored oil, and you're gonna bring them up to temperature really slowly, and you're gonna just infuse the oil with the flavors from the shells. Then when we're making the pasta later, instead of using normal olive oil, we're gonna use a shellfish infused olive oil, and it's gonna really amplify that shellfish flavor in your sauce. After 12-15 minutes, you'll pass this into a container, let it cool completely. If you don't use it all when you're making your pasta, just store it in an airtight container in the fridge. It'll last in there for up to a month. Turn delicious olive oil into delicious shellfish oil. As an optional extra step, you can also put it through a coffee filter, which will get rid of any of the extra protein that's come off those prawn shells. Should leave you with a lovely, clean oil. So moving on to the curry. So specifically, I'm talking about a South Asian curry at this point. But a crucial step in most South Asian curries is tempering of spices in your ghee or oil first. So if you think about spices like cinnamon, clove, coriander seed, green cardamom or cardamom in general, and mustard seeds. You'll find that most recipes from that region start with heating up your oil or ghee and then adding some or all of these spices to infuse into the oil. This starts the base level of a robust flavor profile that can only be achieved by starting it that early in the cook. This is what we mean when we talk about building flavors. Before any onions or garlic or anything has gone into that fat, there's already flavor started being built. And it's not to be confused or mixed up with ground spice blends like garam masala. Garam masala is technically a finishing spice, which you use at the end of making your curry, just to amplify those flavors right at the end. Using whole hard spices at the start really starts as building a good base level of flavor. There's a famous saying that every good meal starts with onion and garlic, and I'm a firm believer in that. But just like in the South Asian cooking, when you're starting a base for a recipe, like a basic tomato sauce, it's really important that you build depth of flavor early on with how much you caramelize onions and your garlic to a certain point as well. So a hot tip, if your onions start getting your way on you, like these are now, just add a little bit of water, brings the temperature in the pan down, and you can scrape off all the foam from the bottom of the pan. Another tip for building base flavor is using these little guys, anchovies, little umami bombs. 2 or 3 in a sauce like this will make the world of difference. They're going to completely dissolve. You won't see them in the sauce. And even if someone says they don't like anchovies, trust me, they won't even taste them. Just make sure they don't have a seafood allergy or they're not vegan or vegetarian. And it's at this point where I'll add garlic. If you take garlic too far, it goes bitter. We want that sweet spot when garlic becomes super mild and sweet and delicious. Once your garlic goes in, make sure you control your temperature. That garlic will burn really quick. So I've turned that element right down low. A little bit of water just to pull the temperature out of the pan. Scrape all the bottom and sides, get all that delicious fond. And then we have an incredibly delicious, well-balanced base to anything that requires onions and garlic. Great base for a stew, great base for a soup, and the amount of caramelization you take on those onions is going to basically dictate how sweet it is. So for me, I wanted it pretty sweet because these tomatoes were pretty sour. That sweetness from those onions is going to counter all that sourness, and you're going to have a delicious base. Don't forget to season as you go. So another key thing I think that people forget when cooking is season often rather than all at the start or all at the end. You're building flavor as you go. That includes your salt levels. A couple of other suggestions and tips for leveling up your base flavors. If you're braising some meat for a long period of time, throw a tablespoon of miso in there. It sounds kind of crazy, but miso is an umami bomb. Over a long period of cooking, you're not gonna taste miso, but you are gonna up the umami factor. And same thing goes if you're making like bolognese sauce or gravy, I think you call it in the US. If you've got a Parmesan rind, put it in there. Parmesan is the ultimate umami bomb. It's full of a natural occurring MSG. So instead of throwing that Parmesan rind out, put it into your bolognese and cook it for a long time. It's only gonna up that base level of flavor. All right, that's enough on base flavors. Next, we're gonna talk about main ingredient flavors or middle flavors. Middle flavors or main ingredient flavors revolve around the quality of the product and the techniques, or should I say, or the techniques that we use to bring them to life and cook them. Inherently, a well-marbled piece of meat at a really high quality is gonna bring more flavor to your dish. However, we don't live in the perfect world and we can't all eat the best quality meat all the time. And that's where the technique part comes into play. We can enhance the flavor of our products, even if we're using not the best quality stuff, just by making sure we're applying the right techniques, making sure we're seasoning them correctly, and making sure that we're getting great color and great Maillard reaction. So let's talk about Maillard reaction, because I think it's often confused as something that only really applies to meat, but it applies to everything. Not everything, but a lot of things. It applies to these mushrooms. It applies to the coffee that you drink in the morning. Maillard reaction is effectively the caramelization, I know it's not correctly the technical word, but the caramelization of the proteins and sugars in your products like your mushrooms and your steaks. And how we treat those in the pan is how we can manipulate how much Maillard we have. If we take some mushrooms, put a pan on the heat, a little bit of oil in the pan, and we just toss them in here without paying too much attention, little season of salt. These mushrooms are just gonna kind of simmer away. The water's gonna come out of them really quickly and there's gonna be no chance of having a really good Maillard reaction. What we end up with is some soggy mushrooms that are kind of gross to eat. They just turn into sponges. Or we do this like we should do it, where we preheat our pan properly and we add our oil, let our oil come up to temperature, and then we add our mushrooms in one at a time so we're not dropping the temperature of that pan too quickly. We're gonna get a much better result. And the difference is really pronounced. These mushrooms were the mushrooms that made people not like mushrooms. It's like eating a wet sponge. The mushroom's overcooked, whereas these ones, they got some good color, more texture, and much more flavor. That Maillard reaction really boosts the sweetness and the umami in the mushrooms. And the same thing applies to if you're cooking a steak, a chicken breast, whatever. Making sure that you treat that protein correctly by ensuring that your pan is hot, your oil's hot before you put your meat in there, you're using enough oil, and you're seasoning it correctly, makes a world of difference. And then bringing our Maillard reaction conversation back to our curry that we started, that's exactly what's happened here. Our onions, garlic, ginger have had lots of great Maillard reaction, and that's why they're all lovely and sweet and fragrant. So now we're gonna add our chicken. So I've got chicken thighs. We're gonna make sure our pan's nicely up to temperature. Why? Because we wanna make sure we get that some sealing on the outside instead of poaching the chicken in a curry sauce. Pan's nice and hot, chicken goes in. We're gonna stir this a couple of times just to make sure those onions are evenly distributed amongst the chicken and they won't catch A little season of salt, seasoning all the way through, and we're gonna leave it. We're gonna let that pan catch up again, get temperature back into that chicken and start building some flavor around that chicken. So the chicken's been in the pan for about 8-9 minutes. We're starting to develop some Maillard reaction. We've got some color happening on the chicken. This is when we add our middle flavors. So I've got Kashmiri chili powder. Kashmiri chili powder is not usually as strong as normal chili powder, and it's got a really vibrant color. You'll often find people will use not only Kashmiri chili powder, but also normal chili powder for the spice. Turmeric, about a teaspoon or half a teaspoon, and then we'll stir that through. Again, we're trying to open up those spices. We don't just want to kind of let those spices dissolve. We want to open them up by getting some heat on them. Excuse me while I'm being blinded by the sun. It's reflecting off something over there. I'm going to stand like this. Like I was saying, we want to open up those spices before we add our coconut milk and our chicken stock. Why do we add stock instead of water? To up the flavor. We're building flavor here. Also worth mentioning that not many South Asian countries would actually use stock like this in their curries. They would usually use coconut milk and water or tomato base. Not that I know of anyway. Let me know in the comments if you know of a South Asian curry that does use stock. Although the jungle curries I think do. That's more Southeast Asia. Andrew, you're rambling. Focus. Now that comes up to a simmer, we're gonna let that just tick over really slowly and make sure that chicken's fully cooked through. Brining. It's become really popular in the last few years, but people in restaurants have been brining stuff for years, and even you think about butchers and how they kind of brine meat and they brine hams and things like that. It's becoming more commonplace in the domestic kitchen, and for good reason, it works. And I'm going to demonstrate that today by taking these 2 chickens. I've got one here that I've brined overnight, so 24 hours, in a 5% salt brine. So for every 1 litre of water, it was 50 grams of salt. So there's 2 litres of water in here, 100 grams of salt. And the salt that we use is really important. In Australia here, we call it cooking sea salt. In the US, it's usually referred to as kosher salt. And in the UK, I'm pretty sure it's called diamond crystal salt. So it's not as fine as table salt. The reason that's so important is because of the size of the actual salt crystals. If you're talking about weight ratio, if the size changes, it's gonna weigh more. Well, if it's a smaller crystal, it weighs more. Anyway, brining. If you want to brine a piece of steak, you do what you usually call dry brining. You can also wet brine, but the issue with wet brine, as you're about to see here, is that you have to dry this really well before we roast it. If we don't, we're fighting with moisture the whole time. Moisture is the enemy of crispy skin. The benefits of brining is that our chicken should have a darker color. It should get nice and golden quicker. The meat should stay a lot moister. We're gonna put these in the same oven with the same treatment. I'm just gonna put a little bit of oil on them both and a little bit more salt on the outside, and then we'll see what one comes out better. So here's our chickens. And the one that we brined definitely has more color. However, the one that we didn't brine actually has more even color, which is kind of interesting. I was expecting the brine one to have a lot more color, but I think the proof's in the pudding. Let's taste some of the breast meat from each and the thigh meat from each, and we'll see what one I like best. I'll taste the control first, and the brined. It doesn't look like it, but there is a massive difference in flavor. When you eat the piece of meat with the skin on the non-brine one, honestly, it was pretty well balanced. It was seasoned nicely. As soon as you didn't have any skin, it was under-seasoned. On the brine one, the seasoning runs all the way through the bird, and you're also getting all those other lovely notes of lemon, thyme, black peppercorn. It just elevates a roast bird from pretty good to excellent. Fully respect that it's a bit of faffing around, and some people don't have a huge amount of refrigeration space to do it, but the results really do speak for themselves. Much tastier roast chicken. Another key thing to remember when we're talking about the mid flavors or the main ingredient flavors is temperature. Now, I always bang on about this, but making sure that we don't overcook our proteins is crucial. Now, if you're one of these people that can cook a steak perfectly every time without one of these, great. Don't stress about this part. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're like me and you don't cook steaks every single day, 100, 200 steaks a day, then one of these things is a lifesaver. There's a reason the best restaurants in the world use thermometers like this to make sure that the temperature that they're aiming for is correct. A few things to remember. Carryover cooking. If you get to the right temperature and you pull it out of the oven, it's gonna keep cooking up to 5 degrees more after it's out of the oven. Same with steaks. If you take a steak off the grill and you rest it, it's gonna keep cooking. It's gonna carry over cooking. So making sure you kind of account for that. I'm not gonna go full on into the science and details behind temperature. I already have a steak video, which will be linked above, talking about temperature when you're cooking steaks. But at the start of the section, when I talked about techniques, this is one of the key techniques, and I think it's second only to seasoning your meat correctly. That's super important to have a really good, well-balanced flavor, because the amount that your protein is cooked really determines how juicy something is, and how moist something is has a huge effect on flavor and mouthfeel when you're eating it. Have you ever wondered why lasagna always tastes better the next day? It's scientifically proven, it's not, I don't know if it is or not, but braised meats always taste better the next day. There has to be some science behind it. I don't know what it is, so I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that I do, but there's a reason that not only your lasagna tastes better the next day, but any braised meats, if they cool down and they sit there overnight, the flavors mold together and they get richer and beefier, if it's beef, and they just taste better the next day. All restaurants that have braised dishes on the menu, they are not cooking it that day. They are cooking it 1, 2, 3 days before, and then they're cooling it down, and then they're heating it up to order. One of the most amazing time-saving things you can do is make your meat sauce like this, like a bolognese sauce, ahead of time. Then let it rest, cool it down completely, and leave it in your fridge and use it for meal prep. The time it has in the fridge is only going to amplify flavor. That's one of the easiest tips I've got for you today. Cook your braises 2 or 3 days before, let it rest in the fridge, the flavors will develop more, and you're going to get much better flavor when it hits your plate. Finally, let's talk about finishing, because I think it's the one that's forgotten about the most in the domestic kitchen. And we're going to start here with our curry. That's been simmering away for about 35 minutes now, which, to be perfectly honest, is too long. It won't be that long in the recipe. But what we need to do at this point is to see where we're at from a flavor-wise. Now, we can take our cinnamon stick out, and if you see the other cloves and stuff, you can pull those out too. First thing we need to do when we're finishing is to taste. Let's see what we're tasting like. And actually think about, what are you tasting, right? So I'm tasting all those beautiful spices, I'm tasting rich, deep flavor, tasting rich, deep coconut, and what am I missing? I'm missing a little bit of salt. We can sort that out pretty quickly. And I'm missing a little bit of acid. Lots of ways we can take this. You can finish a curry with acid by adding raw shallots to the side. You can finish a curry like this by adding some lime juice. You can finish a curry like this by adding some vinegar if you want to. Today, I'm gonna use a bit of lime juice. Acid at the end of a cooking process is super important. The other thing we're gonna do is to finish this curry with a bit of our finishing spice, garam masala. Bit of garam masala in there, our lime juice, stir it around, let those spices cook out for a couple of minutes, and then we'll taste again. Can it take more garam masala? Can it take more lime juice? Can it take more salt? Garam masala is fine, it can take a little bit more salt. I thought I was a barman just then. Hey. Bit more acid. I'm just gonna put half the lime in this time. Turn the heat off. Delicious, well balanced. Salty, savory, a little bit of a sweet note there from all those onions at the start. Great chicken, meaty flavor as well. Let's get some rice. It's worth mentioning too, I'm just using plain rice here. This is not the rice I cooked with the chicken stock. Why? We've made it all that effort to create a really well balanced, full of flavor curry. The rice doesn't need chicken stock as well. The rice is the vehicle to help us soak up all that delicious curry sauce. Probably should have put some veggies in there too. Yum. This, for me, is super comfort food. I love eating this stuff. One of the ultimate hacks to finishing is vinegars, the world of vinegars. There's so many vinegars out there, and I love to collect them. These things don't go off. If you see a good vinegar, buy it, because trust me, you'll use it at some point. Everything from really basic red and white wine vinegars to more premium champagne vinegars to sherry vinegars. This is one of my favorite vinegars of all time. Raspberry red wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, balsamic vinegars. The world of balsamic vinegars is wild. You can kind of get some really outrageously expensive ones, but they're worth it, they're delicious. And then you can do things like this. You can take bottles and you can make really simple flavored vinegars like tarragon vinegar. Put some fresh tarragon into a bottle, glass jar preferably, and then top it off with the white wine vinegar. And all you're doing is infusing the white wine vinegar with tarragon vinegar. And you can do that with all kinds of things. You can put rosemary in here, you could put bay leaf in here, thyme, and this is going to take a long time because I didn't take the nozzle out. At least I'm not spilling it. Then after what feels like literally a decade in time passing, you put the lid on this, and you leave it on the shelf and you let it infuse. In a week's time, you're gonna have some delicious vinegar. It's gonna taste like tarragon. These high quality vinegars, you don't need much of. A little splash on a salad, let me demonstrate. We have our rice that we cooked in chicken stock to boost the flavor, some wombok, some fresh fine herbs, some sliced shallots, and some orange segments, along with some pepitas and some toasted almonds. We're gonna season that with some salt, a little bit of good quality extra virgin olive oil, and then what vinegar should we go with? Well, my old favorite, the sherry vinegar. Nah, we're gonna use this guy. Bit of raspberry vinegar. Drizzle, oh, wow, it smells like raspberries, what a surprise. Drizzle some of that on, give it a good toss. I'm gonna stand here just to really freak out Thiago. And there you go, a delicious rice salad that's full of flavor because we started thinking about flavor and adding flavor right from the start. Finally, I'm gonna make a prawn pasta, very similar to one I made in a YouTube video not long ago, but implementing some of these techniques and ideas that we've talked about a lot today. So I'm just gonna get some stuff ready. Fresh chili. We've got our shellfish oil that we made much earlier on in this video. 1 clove of garlic, just gonna smash that. Anchovies, they're gonna add some great umami. Some cherry tomatoes. Now, cherry tomatoes tend to be a lot sweeter, so we won't need to worry about adding any sweetness through the addition of sauteed onions, or any other sweetness to be perfectly honest. Lemon. We're gonna talk about lemon later. We're gonna use both the juice and the zest, because the zest is also a great way to finish dishes. We've got our prawns, some parsley, and some pasta. Let's get our pasta cooking first. So we've got some water boiling. Let's season it with salt. While that's doing its thing, pan, high heat, gonna add our shellfish oil, building flavor. Then we're gonna add the crushed garlic. Again, building flavor. We're infusing that infused oil with more flavor. Anchovies, we're gonna melt these anchovies down in here. More umami flavor. You can smell that shellfish oil already. It smells delicious. Break up those anchovies into like a paste. Now we add the chili. And our lovely sweet cherry tomatoes. We're gonna add a little bit of salt. The anchovies are already in there and they're already salty, but they probably don't have quite enough. Slowly break these tomatoes down. Let the juices come out of them. Let the sweetness develop. You think about the flavors we've got in this pan right now. We've got full-bodied shellfish flavor. We've got sweetness from tomatoes. We've got spice from the chili. We've got umami from the anchovies, and we've got the aromats of the garlic as well. Now control your temperature, because we don't want that garlic to burn. We want it lovely and sweet. We don't want it bitter. You can help those tomatoes along by giving them a gentle push. It's going to release a lot of that liquid, which is going to emulsify into our sauce, which is already developing. The pasta's cooking nicely. It's probably got about 5 minutes left on the pasta. We can add our prawns. We don't want to add the prawns too early. We don't want to overcook the prawns. We want to keep them nice and juicy. Little toss so they're well coated and all that delicious flavor, and let them cook. I'm going to get a bit more of this delicious shellfish oil in here at this point. While that's doing its thing, we can cut some parsley. Parsley is also a really important finishing tool. People think that in restaurants, herbs are just there to kind of add color. They're also there to add vibrancy, earthiness. We're also going to cut our lemon in half, ready to go. Once that pasta comes out of that water and goes in that pan, we're going to want to emulsify this lemon juice through it. All right, we're going to start testing our pasta for the doneness. Much like I was talking about earlier in carryover cooking, your pasta will also carry over cook. So you don't want this undercooked too much, but you also don't want it cooked perfectly at this point. It's going to keep cooking in that sauce. Not quite ready though. I think our pasta's ready. Let's have one last test. We're going to turn the heat back up under our pan. It's about to get a bit lively around here. Pasta straight in. Don't stress about if you've got a little bit of water in there. We want some of that water. Toss it around. We're going to add a little bit more water. That starchy water, it's key. Going to go on with our lemon juice and our parsley. It's all about finishing, right? We've got good base flavor there from all those aromats and that shellfish oil. We've looked after our proteins well. We've seasoned them. We've made sure they're not overcooked. And then we'll finish the dish. Lots of fresh parsley, lots of fresh lemon juice. This is what you want with your sauce, in my opinion anyway. You want a sauce that sticks to the pasta. Shouldn't pull up at the bottom too much. Then we're ready to plate. Keep some of those delicious prawns for the top. And that final little finishing touch, it's that little bit of lemon zest. It's like super lively, super fresh, which just will bring that pasta alive. God, that sounds so cheesy, doesn't it? Just bring that pasta alive. A little bit more fresh parsley. So there you go, prawn pasta, the shellfish oil, chili, garlic, spaghetti, lots of fresh parsley and lots of fresh lemon. In my opinion, a super well balanced dish with lots of flavor added in along the way. Fully respect, there's a lot of information that was just said in this video. I tried my best to keep it as palatable as possible, but I encourage you to think about those key steps. Think about base flavors. How can you start bringing flavor into your cooking as early on as possible? The mid flavors. How do we respect the proteins that you've got access to, or the vegetables, whatever you're using as your main ingredient? How do we respect that and make sure that they're seasoned well with good color and they're cooked properly? And lastly, finishing. Utilizing the wonderful thing of acid in food to balance out all those other amazing flavors that you've built up over the last 2 steps. Thank you, legends, so much for watching. Please like this video, it helps us out heaps. If you're not subscribed, then consider clicking that. And if you're not subscribed, click. And if you're not subscribed, then click that subscribe button. We post videos here every week around recipes, food culture, and the people that bring it all together. We'll see you next week for another recipe or video, who knows. Peace.